Hey there, my name is Trish Smith. I am a watercolor illustrator based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to my studio. It is always a work in progress. And actually today we're creating a painting of watercolor flowers in my stylized fashion in a awkward shape so that we can fit it into a frame that I really liked at the thrift store, only to find out that the photo was glued into the frame and now we need to retrofit a new picture into that frame. Here's the frame. You can see that it is quite an interesting shape. It's not quite a standard one that's easy to replace, and it has been taped up on the back. It almost looks like a professional or store-bought painting, or well, it could be a painting or it could be a photo. But we have to retrofit some flowers or a design into this existing shape here. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to explore how I create my watercolor flowers in my style. If you want to see that style, you can visit me on Instagram. That's where I post a lot of my artwork, and you can also find out about my life. I have two Instagrams, one for art and then one for my life. And then I rant about tech stuff on Twitter if you're interested in seeing me talk about stuff that is not related to art. So let's get started creating these watercolor flowers. I'm going to show you the techniques that I use to achieve the visual that I'm looking for, and you can see the final product here if you're interested in sticking around to find out what happens. All right, let's get started. Okay, so we're looking at our reference photos. We're using peonies, eucalyptus, freesia, and Swan River daisies. I like to think of my paintings as a bouquet. There's usually a large centerpiece flower accented with smaller flowers and foliage, like a lily surrounded by baby's breath. So at this point I'm using a mechanical pencil that I bought at Muji, very basic, $4, and I'm laying out the different placements of the flowers, keeping in mind the visual weight of the larger flowers, the long nature of other flowers to indicate movement, and then I go right into the details of each of these flowers after placing them on the page. Here I'm sketching out the petals of the peony, along with the pistil and the little details like those little spikes that come out in the middle. Next I move on to the next most detailed flower, which in this case is the daisy. It has a lot of petals and little circles on the inside of each item. This is the freesia, which has a really interesting shape, which makes it more difficult for me to paint. With that interesting shape in mind, I go ahead and sketch it and all of its adjacent flowers, which as you can see have a conical type shape as they go up the stem. After drawing out the foliage, I'm ready to start lining this using Micron fine liners. I go in and sketch the pistils on each flower, that's that center part, just to make sure I get all those details, and then I quickly move into the details on the smallest petals in the painting. So in this case, the flower with the smallest petals are the daisies, and I start lining those out. Using a larger liner, I start to highlight the main flowers of this drawing. That liner I'm using is an 0.8 sized micron. This way it can show the visual balance of a larger flower to a smaller flower. Very useful. And I start then also going into the eucalyptus with that same large line. The eucalyptus was actually really difficult to draw because the multiple directions on each of the stalks of eucalyptus, you have to start thinking about what direction is the leaf coming from. After finishing all the foliage, I go in and start drawing all the different detailed lines, like this, the vein that comes from the center of the flower. It shows the direction of the flower really well, so I always try to include that. And then I line out all those petals that I did on the peony at the beginning. Then I erase and start getting ready to paint that background. I'm doing a nice gold color for the background. I think it'll play really well off of the blues and the pinks in the painting. And using a Cotman, which is by Windsor watercolor brush, I go in and I just do all these details. Now, I could use something a little bit smaller or maybe use a masking fluid, but in this case I just choose to be careful and do the background first so that I can't make too big of a mistake in the future with the going back in with the watercolor background. Now switching into flower mode again, we're painting the pistils onto each of these with that same yellow since it's still on the brush. I first start with the daisies in this case because they have so much extra detail and I try to capture all of that variation on the petals. You can see that I do a light wash of blue to begin with, and then I go back in with that darker blue to give it some dynamic shape. Flowers aren't flat, and I try to make sure that I incorporate that into my paintings, despite the fact I do use a very stylized approach. Once I finish the blues on those daisies, I go into the next largest flower, which in this case is the Freesia. I really wanted to capture that beautiful pink to yellow gradient. So I start doing that exactly with the light colored pink and washing that into the yellow to get that gradient effect. And then I go back in with a darker pink and start to surround them and give them more depth and shadow. At this point I'm giving pops of blue to the eucalyptus. It has a really bluish green color. So I go back over that blue with a nice medium green, and then I do go back in with more detail later with a darker blue-green to give it an effect. So at this point I'm using a very light pink wash, and then I go in with a very dark pink. When you put a dark pink over a light pink wash, the dark pink will fade into the rest of the paint really nicely. I do that for the entire peony, and I try to station or really pick where my dark pink goes to fall in line with where a shadow might be. We have to think that this flower has many pieces that come up and the light hits them all differently, and it is 3D, so we want to make sure that we give it an effect that looks like it's a real flower blooming off the page while also remaining in that very tattoo-esque style that I have. I do this equally to the second peony, and I recognize I might say that a little bit weird, but each of these flowers does have like veins that kind of run up them with darker colors because that's naturally how they occur. So I do go in with the darker pinks and darker blues to give everything nice lines and those nice veins that show the direction that the flower is facing. At this point, I'm finally getting onto my details. I'm using more Micron liners to outline things more darkly. Like I said, this is a very tattoo style, so I do like that dark outline. And then I like to outline the dark outline with white to make the flower pop more. Like doing a stroke effect in Photoshop and then doing another stroke effect or a drop shadow effect to make it stand out against the background. I do this for each of the flowers, and then I do it for the painting as a whole. So not only will I do that for the daisies, the peonies, and the freesia, I'll also do that for the eucalyptus so it stands out against the background on its own. As I finish up this painting, I really think to myself, does the direction and the flow feel right on the eyes? I like having that big centerpiece. I like the length beneath it as if it were falling or cascading. You know when someone holds a bouquet at their wedding and there's that beautiful cascade of flowers? I try to recreate that in my paintings. At this point, I'm using a Q-tip, just a regular Q-tip, to dot in some more pigmented effects. This way, we can have a darker color, make some shadows, and really make things pop. All right, and as we finish up here, I'm using a white acrylic paint just to add in some details. I use Sharpie pens to kind of give it some extra effect in the background, some dots to cover up some lines to really give it that special approach that makes it, a custom piece. And lastly, of course, I put my signature on it, and it's good to go. Hopefully this taught you something. If there's any details that you would like to learn more about, please drop them below in the comments. I'm going to do a tips and tricks on painting here soon, so I can't wait to bring that to you. Talk soon. Bye. Can you say goodbye? Say goodbye.